Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is an absolutely gorgeous day here in Appalachia on this Tuesday. It is the 28th day of April, and it is a pleasure to be with you for the second day in a row, and we look forward to 90 minutes of programming today and then a full 2-hour program here at the Virtual Center tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure to be with you. I hope that you will find today's program rewarding and worthy of the amount of time, of your valuable time that you are willing to give us here at the Virtual Center today. That's really my goal, is the fact that at the end of the program, I like to be able to feel, at least, that I did my part, and that those that did sacrifice or willingly give up a portion of their day to the Virtual Center here were rewarded with a program and with information and insights that made that contribution of valuable time worthwhile. We would love to hear from you here at the Virtual Center. We're into the issue of religious freedom. We're looking at some historical origins and looking at the role that the Supreme Court has played recently in looking at the issue of religious freedom. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. That's 304-663-4676. 4676, of course, translate into HORN, horn, which obviously is very appropriate given the network that brings you the Virtual Center each day. My personal address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me and share your ideas, I would love to hear from you. I would commit to the idea that I'll do the best to respond to you in kind. I'll do my very best to do so. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, and that's all one word, no punctuation, at gmail.com. Before we get into today's program, of course, I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least give mention to some of the issues, some of the situations that are before us, are on the table, so to speak, in our world today. And of course, everybody is focusing on the situation in Baltimore. I just attended a Rotary meeting with a friend of mine who had been up in Baltimore this past week at Johns Hopkins. He's experienced a very, very serious head injury about a year and a half ago, and he goes regularly to Johns Hopkins for checkups and therapy of some kind. And he just left Baltimore on Thursday, and he was talking about how grateful he was to not be there. And again, I think all of us are struck by the demonstrations, and of course, where the media has us bouncing back and forth, and whether the mayor of Baltimore should have moved quicker and done more last night, or whether in fact inadvertently she may have invited some of the violence and some of the rioting by suggesting that she didn't want to make sure that the police in Baltimore didn't overreact, as happened several months ago in Ferguson, Missouri, at the beginning of that particular situation. And so again, we're kind of torn back and forth by the media. It depends obviously on which perspective you listen to as to what you get. I just can't help but be struck by the contrast between the people of Nepal, totally innocent victims of nature in one of the worst natural disasters that we've seen in a long time. The estimates now are that the death toll might go as high as 4,000. That's what I heard this morning. And these people that are innocent victims of a situation over which they have no control, and they are absolutely desperate. And we contrast that with the situation in Baltimore, in which people are looting and setting fires and burning down their own city, so to speak. And one wonders when you look at these things whether in fact some reflection is called for. Whether in fact we really need to do some serious soul searching on some of these issues, because again, the issue of you think that you are very bad off or in tough shape until you look at the next guy walking in the other person's shoes and those kinds of things. And I think we more and more need to do that. But be that as it may. I think.
Hey, Dr. Bill.
Yes, Bob.
Just before you do get back to your original topic, the religious freedom issue, I just wanted to. I, of course, like many others, have been thinking about the issue in Baltimore and the civil unrest there and the underlying brutality that led to it. Let us remember that whether the protests be peaceful or violent, they were all occasioned by another instance of the police killing an unarmed black man.
Of violence, yes.
And, maybe we should take a moment and reflect that in the 100 cases out of Baltimore since 2013, the ones that we know of,
right,
in which someone was killed by the police, a state of emergency was never declared. Not once. Mm-hmm. It's not an emergency when the police kill an unarmed individual. It's an emergency when the unarmed individuals decide they've had enough.
Respond, yeah.
And so because of and I credit you with this. I really, really do, Dr. Bill. You have made me look back, taught me to look back. I've gotten more of a history education from you than I ever did in any institution of higher learning. And you have taught me to look back to primary sources for answers, or for at least guidance. And just last night, out of the clear blue sky, I thought about something that was written on the 2nd day of December, 1859 in Harper's Ferry, Virginia.
Oh, my.
I am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done. And, of course, you know who said that.
Yes, I do.
It was John Brown, just hours before Robert E. Lee supervised his killing for treason against the state of Virginia, to whom he bore no allegiance, as well as for charges of murder as well. But what I got to thinking about last night, Dr. Bill, and I welcome your thoughts on it, and I know we're off topic, but maybe a couple
That's okay. No, that's fine, Bob. All of these are relevant, no question.
Historians understand John Brown to have been prophesying the coming of the Civil War. Mm-hmm. But taken in a larger context, I think it has much more meaning if we understand that had he lived to see the Civil War, and had he lived to see the failure of Reconstruction, don't you think John Brown might have said, no, we haven't cured it yet. We haven't taken care of it yet.
He would have.
And that was what was on my mind last night.
Well, it's interesting you would say that, because last night as we were preparing to turn in, my wife and I we had the news on after 11 last night, and we were, and of course it was all live coverage from Baltimore as all the networks were doing last evening and this morning, and as we were preparing to retire, I can recall I remember myself saying to to my wife, you know, what we need in this country is some sort of a renewal, but a renewal, a different kind of renewal, one that really begins to look seriously at the people in our society that are really hurting. And what I could think of, what I thought of, was the climate that existed in 1960 with the election of John F. Kennedy. I remember that. And I remember how excited people were about the future of this country at that point because he had been elected.
It felt like we were turning a corner.
It really did. And he seemed to be able to touch the right buttons. And what I mean by that is he didn't look like he was leaving anybody out. It looked like he was fully cognizant of the fact that there were an awful lot of people that we owed an awful lot to, and that this was the time that we were going to turn it around and put it all together and carry on, but carry on in a totally different way, in a way which involved everybody. The only other time in my life that I felt that way was in 2008 with the first election, the first administration of Barack Obama. I felt exactly the same way. And I probably, you know, internally, because I didn't talk about it that much to anybody because I didn't have the forum necessarily, but I can remember sitting and just reflecting on myself as to how I felt about the fact that the people of this country had elected a man of color to the White House, and what this might mean for us, and if we could just follow through and begin to repair many of the things that needed repairing.
But what it turned out to mean was that the same tired old racists and bigots that were hollering about the potential of an American president to have to take orders from the Vatican,
right?
Their sons, grandsons, granddaughters, daughters were there in 2009 to begin hollering about him being Obama being a secret Kenyan Muslim.
Right, and I mean, it is, but Bob, I agree with you, and I really think, I mean, my comment the other night about John F. Kennedy was what we need is that kind of a situation. We need that kind of a happening, of a political, social, economic happening in this country. I don't see it. I mean,
and you don't see the likelihood of it happening either, and I think that's the more discouraging part, isn't it?
I mean, as I think back on the issues and some of the substance that we've covered here at the Virtual Center in recent days and weeks, I think about, you know, big money in our political campaigns and the horrendous, and the extent to which you have no control over how people are going to react to this. I mean, some of this information might not be looked upon as information to some people, but it could be in some cases the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak.
I think the camel's back is breaking.
That's what I'm concerned about.
And the camel's back is breaking, to work a metaphor to pieces. The camel's back is breaking under the weight of 1 million chickens coming home to roost on it.
Bob, I understand and I agree, and I don't know, I think what we're doing and what we're accomplishing, not only just here but in other places as well, is we're becoming more aware of the issues and the problems and the reasons that we are experiencing these kinds of problems, but I don't think we've experienced the turnaround or the willingness to commit to fixing them.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and there's and we've discussed this in the past as well. It's easy to fall into the historian's parlor game of what if.
Yeah.
But what if is meaningless. The past is dead, the future is yet unborn, and the only thing we have to work with is the present.
Bob, we have, I mean, the evidence, the issues, and it's almost like somebody's pounding you over the head with a mallet sometimes, because it's just one issue after the other, one thing after the other. I've thought an awful lot about this Suzanne Mettler research that we talked about what's happening in higher education. I mean, that's where I lived my whole working life. And to think that the opportunity to go to college and move up and move into elements and spheres of this society that people from lower echelons never had a chance to get before. And here we've got this vehicle, and here we are squandering it and throwing it away. And our educations, the numbers are telling us that our higher education system and the way we're looking at it today is very little different from higher educations around the world that have been more certification for elites and wealthy people than anything else. Ours was different. And when we came out of World War II with the GI Bill and Pell Grants and those kinds of things, and make it possible for people that never dreamed about higher education before, and made it possible for people to experience the American dream that never even thought they ever would. And here we are squandering all of it and throwing it away and falling for this hype and this bizarre, ridiculous justifications of overemphasis on freedom and
liberty. Don't forget liberty.
Liberty, yeah, and we need to extend liberty, and we need to give more to the few in order to benefit the many. The many have never been this badly off, and the few have never had so much.
Well, exactly.
All you got to do is look at that.
And the one thing, let
me going here, Bob. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The brilliant, I call him a thought leader, whatever that means, writer, editor over at The Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates, has written in the past about the issue of reparations. Mm-hmm. Because, remember, 40 acres and a mule was where we started.
Right.
Because we were going to follow that Jeffersonian agrarian model, right? Mm-hmm. But the issue is still very much alive. If you don't want the kind of hope, these things all arise out of hopeless communities. And let's remember, going all the way back to the 14th century in France and the periodic upheavals of the Jacquerie, when poor people rise up, it never ends well. Mm-hmm. Because they are just squashed, and the next thing, and you bring in the troops, the cavalry, the war horses, whatever, and you call that restoring order when all you're doing is putting off to another day another upheaval.
And even beyond that, Bob, what you do is you do damage to the climate.
Yeah,
that makes reform possible, and it becomes necessary to almost go back to the very beginning and build credibility all over again.
Well,
the people who rise up end up being responsible.
Well, and then
cause them to rise up.
And the chiding and the lecturing is already going on and has been going on in Baltimore. How dare these people? Blah 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is, you have to go back to Dr. King, and a riot is the voice of the unheard. Mm-hmm. Let's engage in a thought experiment here, shall we? Understanding that we can never talk about reparations in the United States because some angry white person will say, well, I never owned no slaves. It ain't my fault. Why should something be took away from me? Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I have to haul out my cracker accent for that because that's exactly how they sound in my own mind.
Yep.
What if we said, and again, we know this is never going to happen, but it's an interesting concept. What if we said every young person of African descent is to be allowed free access to higher education or vocational skills training? Mm-hmm. A 4-year degree. We're not talking about giving them. I don't want to spend it on the University of Phoenix so that they can get an outdated degree in X-ray technology. Mm-hmm. I mean legitimate vocational, through like the apprenticeship programs of the unions.
That's right.
Or through brick and mortar institutions of higher learning. Mm-hmm. What if we said that? What if we made a conscious decision to raise people up to go and with the understanding, almost like a draft, that in exchange for this, you will go back into your communities and you will be the authors of their success, not some well-intended philanthropic white person in an ivory tower, but you. How much change could that bring about in America? It would be monumental, wouldn't it?
Oh, it would be huge, and not only the results of the effort, the mere fact that the society was willing to make it would have a huge, I mean, that's the kind of monumental, humongous injection, if you will, of sincere concern and desire to repair the tears and the holes in in the fabric of this society. It seems to me that we need. And the other side, and again, I think this is important as well, is to basically make, and suggest the idea very strongly that you do not, and this is one of the things that has bothered me because I experienced it, you do not compromise standards in the process of doing this. In other words, you hold people to more rigid standards than ever. You basically offer the purity of a real fair shot at success.
Right. And the only reason I said that people would go back into their communities and rejuvenate it from there is it's not from some desire to keep any particular class of people out of the hedge fund class.
No.
But rather to diminish the influence of that class.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, I noticed that last night in following the coverage, I noticed, unless I'm completely mistaken, and I don't think I am, I noticed that the immediate past president of the NAACP is now a partner at a hedge fund.
Oh, I didn't notice. I didn't note that.
And in that moment, I kind of, I don't know. I think I looked at him differently.
I understand.
Because
it's almost like, is this what it's all been about?
Yeah. And that goes back to what you said about the buzzwords, freedom and liberty.
Right.
If freedom and liberty only mean the acquisition of wealth, then the whole thing is over, isn't it?
No, it's a sense. Bob. It's building a sense of community, and we're tearing that apart, and we're not only doing that, we're downplaying the importance of community. And all around us, I mean, we live in gated societies. We define success by our ability to live in a gated society, which traditionally most people think means the opportunity to be so successful as to move in there, when in fact it's becoming very clear that the real issue involved is having the resources necessary to separate yourselves from people you don't want to live with or to be associated with.
From the hoi polloi.
It's a very negative attack, and
it's exclusionary. It's segregationist.
Yeah, it is. It's terrible.
Well, when I was a little baby DJ, I'd get calls every few nights, Dr. Bill, from people saying, "Hey, Bob, will you play Jesus? This is Jimmy."
Yeah.
Or drop kick me, Jesus, through the goalposts of life. I was at a gospel radio station.
Mm-hmm.
And there were things that people just like to hear again and again and again. And I mention that because I have a request of you, Dr. Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is time for you, if I may so humbly suggest, it is time for you to revisit and re-explain American exceptionalism.
Oh, okay.
Because that phrase, and how sad is it? But that phrase, along with the words freedom and liberty, have been made by the right wing so odious, so freighted with hateful intent, that I can scarcely stand to hear them anymore.
I know it.
And at some point in time during the broadcast schedule, try to carve out 2 hours.
Okay.
Just to revisit.
We'll do that one day next week.
From the beginning to the present.
We will.
American exceptionalism, because I've referred to that evening when we came back from dinner during the Prism series,
right?
And you then began explaining American exceptionalism, and I sat there in the back of the room with the little hairs standing up on the back of my neck, a tingle from top to bottom, thinking, "Wow, if only the whole country could hear this." It would change the. Well, I mean, if everybody had an understanding of American exceptionalism the way you explain it, then none of these charlatans who prattle on about freedom and liberty and American exceptionalism could ever get away with it again.
No, I agree. I agree, and the point is, it's not a denial of exceptionalism; it's a redefinition that is designed to promote hope, not despair.
Well, and it's all.
And if what we've got here, as we turn on the television, look at what's happening in Baltimore and other places. If this is symbolic of an exceptional nation, it seems to me that the term has no meaning. I mean, this is as far away from a nation that has reached the point of exceptionalism as one can get. When you have hundreds and thousands of armed policemen on the streets trying to hold back disenchanted, disgusted, and again, I realize that within the confines of the protesters there's all sorts of different agendas going on. We all realize that. And of course, depending on who's bringing the story to us, they point to the particular agenda that seems to fit their agenda most appropriately. If you can turn on and just go back and forth between, as an example, CNN and Fox News, or MSNBC and Fox News. I don't care who you watch, but just go back and forth, and you will see cameras. You'll see pictures of the same thing, but the interpretation is totally different. It's unbelievable. And Bob, I would love to do that. I really would.
I hope you will, and not that I'm a prophet or any kind of magic or anything, but I suspect we will be having, or you will be having, and I will close my mic and allow it to happen. I suspect you will be having a call from a resident of the city of Baltimore in a matter of mere minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, that will be great, Bob. I'd love to have that, but. We are, we've reached almost the top of the hour. We've got a full hour to go.
Yeah,
so
I just stole a half hour of your program from you.
Oh, you didn't. I think it's great. And I was going to, and I didn't do this when we talked before I went on the air, but I want to say it now. When we get into the legalisms of this issue of religious freedom and get into some of these Supreme Court cases and the definition of some of these terms, like strict scrutiny and those kinds of things, and you feel that you have the opportunity to contribute to our understanding and meaning of those terms from a legal perspective, please don't hesitate to share those with us, because I think we're here for the information. We're here to try to understand as much about some of this stuff as we can. So, if you feel you've got something to contribute, by all means, feel free to do so.
I absolutely will. And by the way, just to give you an idea, this is already being capitalized upon by the hardcore authoritarian right wing. Here, for instance, is an email I just received from Americans for Limited Government.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they saying? Baltimore riots mark city's tourism suicide note.
Oh, yeah.
God. Well, in point of fact, that call has come through. And I want to introduce you, Dr. Bill, to a good friend of the Horn.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Harry, recently of Washington, D.C., now of Baltimore City. Are you there, Harry?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And I must confess, I just recently tuned in, and I apologize for being, quote, late. But
you're not. But, hey, Harry, you're not late. This is Bill O'Brien. Welcome.
And I will stand aside. I will stand aside and let you two talk.
Well, Harry, you're in Baltimore, from what Bob. This is the first time we've ever spoken, so I don't want to spend a lot of time asking you for particular personal information, but I'm very interested because Bob said that you were in D.C., but that now you are in Baltimore. What can you tell us?
Well, first of all, I certainly don't want to muscle out Bob Kincaid because I was listening to the two of you talk, and I found it fascinating, which is why I even emailed Bob to see if I could call in. So I hope Bob will not feel that he needs to stay off his microphone.
I'm not the least offended. I'm not the least offended, Harry. But I want the time to be yours and Dr. Bill's, and I'm going to be quiet.
Oh well, I'm not sure. Well, I guess. Well, let me just say,
Harry, if we play our cards right, he can't be quiet.
Well,
I've known Bob Kincaid too long to know that when you tickle him in the right place, he's not quiet. But anyway, I'd be very, very interested in what you can say because I've been watching the coverage of this like everybody else, and what I've noted as much as anything is the perspective of the people bringing us the coverage. I find that it's almost like we're looking at marionettes that are that we're looking at some sort of a play and it's being interpreted for us. And I'm the fact that you're there, I'm very, very interested in what you might bring to our understanding of what's going on in Baltimore.
Well, Dr. Bill, you're very kind, and I appreciate your generosity in having me on the air with you. And I have listened to your show on and off, as Bob doesn't know. I've been listening to Bob's show for about, I guess it would be several years now, maybe 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I certainly listen to some of your shows, Dr. Bill, though not usually often live because I'm usually engaged in some sort of activity of my own in the afternoons. But
sure,
Dr. Bill, I have listened to your programs by, in a sense, downloading them and listening to them, sometimes even late in the evening when I'm looking for intellectual, frankly, stimulation. So and I know how much Bob respects you and how much he is eager to have you on the air. And I had read his tweet about your coming back into town after the traveling. So that's what prompted my interest. And then when I realized that you were both talking about Baltimore, I guess I couldn't resist. But I do want to say very modestly, I've only been here for about a couple years. And not only that, I would say that despite the fact that I didn't live that far away, I used to live in D.C. for many, many years, I would say that my knowledge of Baltimore, at least certainly compared to the natives and people who have lived here a long time, is just very weak. So I've been trying to catch up, and certainly, I've been asking questions about Baltimore ever since I've come to live here, but I must say that the recent events, I'm still catching up.
Sure.
And so I want to just modestly say that I'm not sure how much illumination I can actually bring. It's just that I guess I was just too tempted by your discussion, and I guess I just wanted to check in and if I could be of help in any way, I'm happy to do so.
Well, Harry, one of the things that struck me, and I'll just throw this at you, and this is one of the things I noticed this morning. I don't know whether this is significant or not, but it struck me. It kind of caught my attention, and that was because I've been to Baltimore a couple of times, but I don't know where. In terms, I know where these riots are happening because I've been to ball games at Camden Yards, but I don't know where location-wise Johns Hopkins University is in terms of where these disturbances are happening. But this morning, I heard a report that the administrative officials at Johns Hopkins were doing everything they could to barricade or to fence off or isolate students at Johns Hopkins from what was happening in the city of Baltimore. And I don't quite know what that involves or what distance we're talking about or anything else. But it seems to the first thing that occurred to me is it would seem to me that the Johns Hopkinses of the world ought to be on top of these things and providing some of the ideas and some of the insights and some of the strategies that might go toward repairing some of these things and the circumstances that created them. It seems to me, I grew up in Boston and yes. I'm very very familiar with Harvard. And in fact, yes. I my claim to fame at Harvard is that one of the part-time jobs I had while I was going to college was to wash dishes in the Harvard Business School on weekends. Mm-hmm. And I mean that's the closest I ever got. And but everybody talks about the Harvard Yard and the walls around it. And of course the reality is it's set off when you walk inside those walls at Harvard. It's like you're in a totally different land, the outside world of Cambridge and Harvard. The square itself is gone. You don't hear the horns, you don't hear the automobiles, you don't hear the traffic, you don't hear anything, and it's almost like you're transmitted into another world. And it always seemed to me that institutions like Harvard probably ought to be a little bit more involved rather than more isolated from the communities and the societies that they exist in. And I was struck by the same thing this morning with the announcement about Johns Hopkins in relationship to these riots. I don't know whether the campus, the buildings are threatened by what's happening with these demonstrations, or whether Johns Hopkins is far enough away that they don't have to worry about that or whatever. I just don't know. But anyway, that occurred to me, and I was just wondering whether that made any sense to you.
Yes, well, I can speak to that, although I just want to say that it's a very, as you can imagine, it's very complex, and I'm sure I don't understand all this. I do not understand all the subtleties, but I'll try to be responsive to what you're asking. Sure. And by the way, I lived in Boston myself for 10 years, so I know what you're talking about in terms of Harvard and its relationship to the community. There are two things. There are two thoughts that occurred to me. First of all, it's odd because you were talking before about how different media have portrayed these things in different ways, and I think you're absolutely correct. In fact, locally here, you can even see the difference because I was watching TV earlier this morning, and I rarely watch TV. In fact, most of the time I don't watch at all. But I was switching back and forth between, for example, the CBS and NBC, the local stations, and then the Fox station. Mm-hmm. They have one here in Baltimore. And there was a decided difference in the way that activities were being portrayed even today, because there is now a gathering at one of the central locations where there was rioting last night, and it's supposedly, and I think it's intended to be a peaceful gathering, but the Fox News station was definitely portraying it in a little more ominous terms than the NBC station that I've done most of the watching of. Mm-hmm. And that struck me right away. Of course, people are worried. The site where people are gathering is one of the sites last night that was one of the 4 or 5 sort of pockets of rioting. And so, as you can imagine, everybody's worried about it. But so far, anyway, at least when I turned off the TV, it was all very peaceful. And also there were some musical groups there, and I think some of the spiritual leaders were trying to... Oh, and also Reverend Jesse Jackson had actually come down to that mm-hmm. area to talk to people. So
right.
Nobody knows yet what's going to happen. Hopefully that will stay peaceful this afternoon, which I'm sure is what most people want and intend. About Johns Hopkins, I had heard first the coverage on TV is now, they've not said a lot about it. I had actually heard that they were trying to stay open today, and I heard that, I forget who, it may have been from an official of Hopkins. The area where Johns Hopkins is, it was not, at least in my, looking visually or thinking visually about it, they are not immediately threatened, but they were, the campus, well, here's what happened. Last night, there was a structure near the medical school, which is on the other side of Baltimore, on the so-called sort of west side. Mm-hmm. And that's where there was a large fire last night of a structure that was being built. I'm not sure about being built by whom. I don't think it was by Hopkins, although They're involved in that community because that's where the medical school and the medical center is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that put a definite, I'm sure that made some officials at Johns Hopkins very worried, because it seemed like that part, the medical school, the medical center, the main Hopkins hospital, which is far away from where for the other campus is,
right,
which is called the Homewood campus. So anyway, you have that event going on last night, and that was a huge fire. Now, as I said, that was in or near the Hopkins medical area, and although I'm not sure it's a Hopkins building, I had heard differing reports about who was building that building, but it was meant apparently for as some sort of senior affordable housing for seniors, and Hopkins may have been involved in some way. The second thing I would say is that although the other campus, which is where the student, the liberal arts students are, and the public health school is, although it was not near any pocket of rioting. On the other hand, it's sort of in that middle area of Baltimore, where in fact there were several pockets. They as was said last night in the news, most of the violence and looting took place in what's called West Baltimore, and I would put Hopkins sort of right in the middle between West and East.
Okay.
And there were then there were also, unfortunately, last night, apparently because of the police presence in West Baltimore, apparently overnight there were some buildings set on fire, or at least certainly some violence and some looting in parts of what's called East Baltimore. So then there was a sense, I guess, that East Baltimore was more vulnerable because in a sense the police had been concentrating in West Baltimore. This is all very confusing, I realize, but some of this happened overnight. And go ahead.
No, it makes sense. I was just going to say it's not. You're explaining it very well.
Well, you're very kind. I wish I could explain it better. So Hopkins is sort of in the middle, in a sense. As people say, Charles Street divides Baltimore between East and West, and or is it North and South? Well, I see there. Now my mind is going. But in any case, that other campus where the undergraduates are, where the public health school, that's right in the middle, in a sense, of that area of Baltimore, which some people would not necessarily call downtown, because downtown is considered like the inner harbor, which is much farther, in a sense, near the water. But that middle area, Hopkins, in a sense, is in the middle of it, I suppose. And so maybe they want to protect their students. There are a lot of students who live right around there at that Homewood campus, as it's called, and there are certainly buildings, that have many students in them. So I don't know what's going on at Johns Hopkins today, but it seems like there are sort of conflicting representations as to what extent, Hopkins is feeling. But, the thing is, I agree with your main point, and I have heard this from longer-term residents of Baltimore, that Johns Hopkins could be doing more, in a sense, for Baltimore, that there is, to that Hopkins, there is, in a sense, a culture of Hopkins, part of which is still would be called somewhat elitist. And although and then Hopkins actually has been expanding itself as a corporate entity within the city of Baltimore, particularly in the sort of the biomedical sector.
Yes.
So there is this sense, yes, I would say, particularly on the west side, which is now where the hospital and medical school complex is, which is much poorer. Actually, the Homewood campus in the middle there is actually in near some relatively affluent areas, and certainly maybe Hopkins has contributed to that.
Right.
But certainly on the west side, yes, I would say many residents there do not feel that Hopkins does enough or has done enough.
Right.
To contribute to the community or to buy up even vacant housing and make that available. So so there are lots of complaints, in a sense, about Hopkins. As much as there may be elements within Hopkins and people there who are trying to do very, very good and noble things for the community.
Yes, of course. Harry, one of the I guess where my focus on this comes from, and again, this is just a focus of mine. I haven't heard anybody else mention, except in passing, Johns Hopkins. But But one of the things that really concerns me, and it's not so much just the Baltimore issue itself, but I guess it's my background in higher education, but one of the things that really concerns me about higher education in this country is that we have somehow accomplished to so isolate our higher education institution, if you will, from the communities and the society at large. And I know that the old image of the ivory tower, so to speak, and those kinds of things, and the classic image, the Platonian idea of higher education as being a place where people are free to exchange ideas and not worry about pressure from outside and all those other things. In other words, to isolate politics. If you get politics out of it, then you can really have honest discussion and honest engagement with issues. And I know that there's some legitimacy to that, but the fact of the matter is many of the issues, the real substantive issues in this society, like jobs and the economy and the role of government and all of the major things that the whole political system revolves around, all of that is happening without any involvement or any presence at all of our higher education institutions and the expertise that they contain. In other words, we've got economists and political scientists and historians and sociologists and psychologists and by the score in our colleges and universities. And these problems that our society is engaging, somehow we've silenced the higher education establishment to the point that their expertise doesn't even enter into the picture. And in that, in response to that gap, politicians move in and offer their ideas and their suggestions and their solutions. And somehow our higher education people remain silent. I don't know if in my own situation, I know that a lot of it is fear. I know that a lot of it are looking for protecting their own jobs, and they don't want to become involved in some of these issues because it could backfire on them. I know that, and I kind of used to think that this was something local and that it probably is not this bad around the country at large, but I'm beginning to wonder, in fact, whether it is. And I guess when I heard that comment this morning about Johns Hopkins and them trying to barricade the campus and keep students on campus and protect them from what was happening in Baltimore, and all I could think of as part of education is knowing exactly what's going on in Baltimore, not shielding people from it, But anyway, that's where I'm coming from, and I don't even know if that's fair to even raise that issue, but I raise it because I think there's a lot of expertise in this country, and I think back historically to the creation of land grant institutions in this country, and the whole idea behind the land grant movement, the so-called Wisconsin idea that Scott Walker is trying to stifle, is that you bring this expertise together and you turn them loose to solve some of the problems that society faces. Not only aren't we doing that, it seems to me we've turned our backs and gone in the other direction.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know whether that makes any sense or not, but that's one of the things that really disturbs me about this, and I see an example of this in what's going on in Baltimore. There's no question that the frustration is, it just comes right through the TV screen. You can't miss it. It seems to me.
Yes. Well, that's very perceptive of you. I think that's true. I think there's enormous frustration and anger about. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, even the people that are covering their faces because they don't want to be identified, occasionally on TV, if you look at the eyes of some of these people, if the cameras get close enough and you get a picture of the eyes of these people, and you can see this anger and this frustration, and I'm saying, my God, why can't, this is what we've got to solve. This is what we've got to address. We need to do, Bob mentioned just before you called, I don't know if you heard this, Harry, but Bob was talking about what if we made higher education and trade school education available at no charge to every African American youngster in this country. Would that be the kind of signal from society at large that we really did intend to get to the root of some of these problems and really fix them? I think.
Well,
I think that's
of course, I'm Caucasian. I mean, I'm Jewish, but I'm Caucasian, certainly to the bone. And I would hate to speak for any African American in the city, but I happen to think personally it was a very fine idea. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that I think what's going on, or what has happened here in Baltimore, and I mean, I don't know if you heard President Obama's remarks around noontime today.
I did not.
Yeah. Well, he actually, more than people expected, I gather, went on at length about saying how this was basically not a new problem. This had been going on for, decades, and that problems of opportunity and jobs being stripped away. And he actually spoke to that, talked about manufacturing jobs being stripped away, sent overseas. So he was saying, in a sense, first he wanted to make it clear that obviously that the violence and looting was not in any way, constructive and would not be tolerated. But then he also went on to say, basically, that there really was this big societal issue and that this was not new at all.
No.
And that people should realize this, and that any corporate officer or head who was, shaking their head and saying, "Oh, this is terrible," that those people should be thinking about what have they done, one way or the other. And I have read, about studies, and there are people, I think, at Johns Hopkins, and also, of course, there are other universities here. Now, the other problem, I guess, in Maryland is, I don't know, there was and still is, in fact, this controversy about historic black universities, and sort of, in a sense, things. There was a lawsuit, a long-running lawsuit that went on, and I don't even know if it's been finally settled, but having to do with to what extent should the historic black universities, or should the so-called, what you might want to call historic white universities, be competing with historic black colleges and universities over programs. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of concern about that, about duplications of programs. There's, near where I live, there is a very prominent, we started as an African-American university, Morgan State University. And they have they certainly, for example, they have a public radio station, and one of the morning hosts, who is who is a lifelong resident, cares a great deal about Baltimore. He always has professors from Morgan State on talking about these kinds of social issues. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there are people consulting from Morgan State and from other universities as
mm-hmm.
well. There's also Towson University up in Baltimore County.
Right.
So, but the question is, I suppose, yes, for example, John, and there are social scientists of all economists, who have been, in a sense, involved in Baltimore, and some of them doing, both short-term or longitudinal studies, and there are people involved, I think, but there is this question about the institution, I suppose, and there is this question about Johns Hopkins and whether, in a sense, because they, in a sense, have so much now, and certainly, they seem to be continuing to expand, are they, in a sense, doing enough for the city or giving back enough? Or, as I had mentioned before, are they indeed helping communities to rebuild? It's been mentioned, I'm sure you may have seen the coverage, but it's been mentioned that the National Guard has not been called into Baltimore since 1968, mm-hmm. when the riots, surrounding Martin Luther King happened. And indeed, there are blocks and blocks and blocks in Baltimore City, in some of these areas that even, where they were rioting, which are vacant, part of it has to do with the fact of certain areas not being rebuilt, or, being rebuilt adequately since 1968. Mm-hmm. Some of it has to do with the flight to the suburbs. Baltimore mm-hmm. County, which is a separate, jurisdiction from Baltimore City, mm-hmm. although it sort of somewhat surrounds Baltimore City, at least on two sides, there's been a lot of flight to Baltimore County, because the feeling was, well, that Baltimore City was deteriorating, or that, or that maybe it feels better or there's more status connected with living in Baltimore County versus Baltimore City. And so there's been a lot of that since the 60s as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and Baltimore City has shrunk in population. And now you have blocks and blocks or areas, lots of vacant buildings and, both commercial buildings and residential buildings. And there's not a lot of direction on what to do with them. And see, so frankly, there are a lot of people who would blame actually the leadership of the city as well. Not
Mm-hmm.
just, the wealthy institutions within the city,
Right.
but also the city leadership, the mayor and the city council. I can tell you, and this is, I'm going to take you, I'm sorry, I'm going to take you off subject, but
That's okay.
I read, there are people, how can I call them, professors or intellectuals outside, of Baltimore who I think have certainly written a lot about this, and particularly about the ravages of, hyper-capitalism or vulture-capitalism, whatever you want to call it. One of them is, I don't know if you're familiar with him, a sociologist named Richard Sennett, who back in the 1970s co-authored a classic book called The Hidden Injuries of Class. And he's basically a labor sociologist, although he's sometimes just written about cities. But lately, or at least back about 10 years ago, he then started to write about labor again and about what capitalism was doing. And he wrote a series of books, one of which, I think the first one that came out was called The Corrosion of Character, and it had to do with, the corrosion of character, the personal consequences of work in the new capitalism. And then he wrote another book called something about the culture of the new capitalism, which came out in the 90s, later in the 90s. Mm-hmm. He also wrote a book called The Craftsman, and I think as I understand, I've read all three of these books, although it's been a while now. All three were basically trying to talk about what the so-called new capitalism or, neoliberal capitalism is doing not only to work itself, but also to people's lives in the sense of, as he puts it, the fact that it's harder for people to have sort of a work and life narrative when the job, he talks about two things, in fact, and I've heard him talk about this even in a video lecture, and I would ask people, in fact, he even has a website where a lot of his talks are recorded. And he talks about two things. He says, first of all, of course, you have the manufacturing sector, where basically just people, the jobs, without regard for the people who have those jobs were considered disposable in a sense that the corporations had no qualms about just letting them go overseas because they decided that, manufacturing jobs, that anybody could do them, so therefore why not have the people you can pay the least to do them?
Sure.
And then he said in the service sector, the problem is that now you have this phenomenon of, sort of precarious employment where all jobs, in a sense, are insecure and could be short-term. And so he said, even if you have an economy in mainly service sector jobs, you don't have, in a sense, career ladders in those jobs or in that sector, because you never know when your job may, in a sense, become a just-in-time kind of job where one day you're needed, the next day you're not, or when you may have to move from one job to another. So so I think, anyway, that has resonated with me in the sense of,
in fact,
in my own life, in terms of, the idea that one can have and build sort of a narrative or a career, in a sense, where you build up, where not only do you build up skills, but you also, in a sense, build up an identity based on, having a certain kind of job or being in a certain institution for a long time. And I can say that Baltimore, in that sense, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I think I know where you're going. I was going there also. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. So in Baltimore, this, in a sense, is maybe a vivid example. I'm sure there's a more eloquent thing I could say of it, but you have that phenomenon here, where in Baltimore, where indeed the city of Baltimore, one of the reasons it fell apart, and is not just flight to the suburbs, but also the manufacturing base of Baltimore was indeed stripped away in the last 30, 40, 50 years.
Right.
There are many companies that used to have factories here, manufacturing plants, and in fact, you can still, I've driven in around Baltimore, and you see signs on buildings of companies no longer here that, are companies that, that I remember even from my childhood and have read about. So those companies no longer have any kind of factory or manufacturing plant or whatever here in Baltimore.
Right.
So you have all that, and then you have I suppose what other people would say would be basically the stripping away of funds of the public sector. The schools, when you don't invest in the schools, whether they be the public, secondary schools or even the public universities, and we have many of them here in Maryland, then, in a sense, you've taken away jobs. You've also taken away accessible places for people to learn. And, we're not, I'm not talking about private universities, I'm talking about public universities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Baltimore, many cities, I suspect, in a sense, are like Baltimore. And, maybe we hit a flashpoint here because of issues of police brutality, although that's happened elsewhere as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, this is certainly a place where one might expect this kind of thing to happen because of what, in a sense, has happened to the city as a community.
Mm-hmm.
I think bad things have happened to this community.
The literature that you referred to, the books that you referred to, and the theme of those about a work lifestyle narrative,
yes.
It seems to me that what's happened is the jobs that have left provided something that the jobs that have replaced them cannot provide.
Yes.
That the ability of a job to fulfill a person to the point that an entire way of life would stem from it, those jobs don't even exist anymore. And now we're talking about we can use the term minimum wage. Some of them pay a little bit more than minimum wage, but the message is the same. They're just a way to earn income in order to take care of life's necessaries, but they have nothing to do with life itself.
Yes, I would agree with that completely. And this author I'm referring to, the sociologist Richard Sennett, who used to teach only at NYU, and actually now he's also teaching at the London School of Economics about cities.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, he has said this, and he's also said that we also, in a sense, have demeaned all kind of work, because he said that he has studied. He wrote this book called The Craftsman, where he basically, in a sense, was studying and thinking about even manufacturing jobs, and they're saying, there actually are skills in work that that maybe corporations, decided to demean and therefore saw as disposable. But in fact is that, things that take skill, you can't just learn in 1 week. He's saying, in fact, many of them take many years to learn properly, and that there are, in a sense, skills of, quote, what he calls the craftsman, that people, in a sense, even in what you might want to call, I don't know what you want to call them, blue-collar jobs, required certain skills and required experience to learn how to do things, or even, as he says, to learn that there are many ways to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that when those things, in a sense, become imbued in you through many, 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 many hours of learning and of experience on the job, that is a skill, and that he believes, in a sense, we have de-skilled our society in both ways. One way, as you said, was the service sector. The other way was when you, in a sense, decide that manufacturing jobs are disposable, then you lose the skills that the people working formerly in those jobs brought to everything they did.
It's kind of ironic that in some cases the very same people that complain the loudest about Americans' unwillingness to work today are the people responsible for eliminating from work the essence of what made work attractive to people, if that makes sense. I mean, there was much more to work than an income. And
Yes,
I hear this
absolutely.
all the time when you have debates about pay raises and things. There's much more to a job than an increase in pay. I mean,
Yes.
there are many other ways to compensate the quality of work by the people who provide it than money.
Yes.
But our society tends to reduce everything to dollars and cents because it's measurable, but it's extremely demeaning. It's dehumanizing.
Yes.
And
I agree with you completely. And I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead. I'm more
Well, I was
interested
going to
in
go
hearing
ahead
from
and
you.
say that actually you you must have an intuitive link to this Professor Richard Sennett I've been talking about, because I saw one recorded video lecture of his at a university where, in fact, he had just been at and I don't know, this may have been even 7 or 8 years ago, or 9 years ago, even before President Obama became president. But he said he had just been at a summit at the White House about work. And he said that all the people he met there, who were all these, lots of executive corporation types, he said they all were complaining to him that, they couldn't find enough, skilled or talented workers.
Right.
And Professor Sennett said, he said it's very ironic, because these are the people who decided that all those manufacturing jobs and the kinds of, and having a skill-based society, that we could basically, in a sense, these things were disposable.
Yeah.
And he said, these are the people complaining to him about the lack of good workers or whatever, or the skilled workers.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, Professor Sennett also said, and this is just, he hasn't talked about this a lot in this book, but as an aside, he, for example, has said that he thinks that even the campaigns, for more and more standardized testing, to where there's testing going on all the time, multiple choice tests, he feels that in a sense that is de-skilling our society.
Yes.
Because he points out, that if you take a standardized test, you don't really learn very much from it. Because, for example, let's say you get interested in one of the answers that's not the, quote, right answer, but it's a wrong answer.
Right.
And he said, but on a test, he said, you can't explore that because you have to keep moving. It's a time test.
That's exactly right. The purpose of a standardized test is to measure what you know, whereas testing ought to be a learning experience for the person who takes the test, because it gives them an opportunity to get some idea of how much they know and how much insight they have and how much creativity they have and all of that. But when you reduce it to right and wrong answers, all that's being measured is it is the information you know, not the insight, not your ability to explore or explain or anything. And it's demeaning. It really denies knowledge that people genuinely have and have no way to express. But
yes.
Can I ask you a question back to the Baltimore thing, Harry? And
Sure.
This is just something that occurred to me, and I don't know. I'm interested if it might have, if you see it, because you're right there. You're right there within it. One of the things that bothers me as much as anything about this is I'm seeing the very same combination of frustration and anger on faces that we see and read about when we talk about why people from all over the world are joining ISIS. And what I mean is that there's no question that the treatment of Muslims in the past, many times by other Muslims, is split between Sunnis and Shia, for example. And some of the history that has gone on in certain parts of the Middle East. And it seems to me that what we did with the Iraq War in terms of toppling Saddam and all the rest of it is we made it possible for all of this hatred and frustration to coalesce, and now it's showing itself in this movement that we call ISIS. And we really don't understand it. We do the same thing we're doing in Baltimore. We basically label them as thugs. And that's simple. We can deal with that. That once we classify them as thugs and criminals and inhuman and butchers and all of those things, then that allows us to distance ourselves far enough away from them that we don't have to spend any more time trying to figure out what it is that's driving them. But in a sense, I think we're seeing what is feeding ISIS in the faces of the people that we're seeing on television in Baltimore. I feel that. I don't know whether it's true, but I just have that sense.
Well, I guess I guess I don't feel I have enough knowledge.
I understand what you mean. I'm not. I'm just kind of throwing this out as an idea because I think what that there's no why. One of the things that I heard yesterday, for example, or last night, was the report that there were gangs, 3 gangs in Baltimore that had agreed to join forces in order to kill or maim policemen. That's one of the things. That was one of the rumors. That was one of the rumors that was being thrown around.
But that rumor, as I understand it, that rumor has been completely discredited today. And
but
fact, my understanding is, go ahead.
I was just going to say what interested me in that was the mention of gangs and some of the literature that I've seen on why inner city kids and people join gangs in the first place. And it seems to me that gangs provide the kind of psychological support and sense of belonging that many of these people can't find anywhere else, whether it's within family, whether it's within school, in a job, or whatever. And I would think that that's the same kind of thing that's driving people to ISIS. I mean, it's this sense that there's this one place where you can really gain some respect, and at the same time find a way to get back at some of the people that you feel are responsible for the situation you find yourself in. I don't know whether that's true.
Bill,
but
I think I should just defer to your brilliance.
No,
on this.
it's not brilliance. All I'm doing is throwing this out, but the one thing I did want to ask you because you are there is this morning there seemed to be some controversy about the mayor and whether in fact the mayor had waited too long to to request a state of emergency call from the governor. And the governor's response this morning that the same thing would not happen today or tonight again. And I'm wondering if the same situation reoccurs tonight. I'm wondering whether in fact we're liable to see a police response that is liable to be totally different and to be dreaded.
Well, I think that's the $1 million question. I mean, the news TV stations have been, the reporters in the field, the anchors have been sort of talking back and forth about this. The governor, of course, said that he certainly did not want to activate the National Guard until the mayor requested it. And, and I think, people can say, well, that sounds like, a reasonable thing to do because you don't want to, in a sense, undermine, what the mayor of the city needs or wants. The question, yes, really is, I suppose, just about tonight, right? And, as I said, when I turned off the TV about 2 hours ago now, there was this, I think, which everybody hoped was a peaceful gathering in one of the areas that had been of unrest last night. And the question is whether things have calmed down and whether tonight will be much calmer. Now, I should, mention the mayor even waited to, again, I think this was to try to not, there was a great deal of worry, I think, particularly in the city, about not having not starting up, right from day one, a situation similar to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri.
Yes, I see that, yeah.
Right. I don't think the mayor said that, but I think that's sort of what the analysts or commentators are saying, is that they could see how, the mayor they didn't want a disproportionate response, without without needing it. And so the question is now, I guess, is tonight. This is the first night also of a curfew for everyone in the city, which starts at 10 p.m. And I'm talking about adults as well as children. Starts at 10 p.m. and goes until 5 p.m. and it's going to be on for the rest of the week. But even that, they didn't. The mayor didn't. That curfew didn't start until tonight. And again, I think that was done in a sense not to take people by surprise and suddenly say last night, okay, there's a curfew now, right away.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the mayor was preparing, I suppose you could say, people for that curfew.
Yeah.
Now, here are the issues, though. There's a bigger. I don't think the picking apart of the details about the response last night is the problem as much as there's this general feeling of a lack of leadership in the city. And that has been there for, as I gather, many years now. And there is, among certain parts of the population, a great lack of enthusiasm for the current mayor, whose father was a popular politician in the city many years ago, and the current lack of enthusiasm for leadership, and also a lack of enthusiasm about the involvement of the city council people. There are, I believe, 13 city council people, and of them, in my short time here, I would say that I would view maybe 3 to 5 of them as being active and involved and responsive, and the rest of them, you never read about them in the paper, or you never hear about them, or you don't hear about them doing anything. And that's another issue, is whether you even have a city, legislature in a sense that even is functional. Because you have 13 city council people, and yet maybe, and I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say 5 of them are, known to be quite active and involved. That's not necessarily, it's not a good sign. And then if you, on top of that, you have this, in certain sectors, this great lack of enthusiasm for the mayor and her leadership. And see, this leadership is about these things like economic development, in other words, or let's put this like jobs, in other words, helping the people who need help. I mean, there's certainly been economic development, for example, down at the Inner Harbor, which a lot of people know about as a big tourist attraction. But what about the rest of Baltimore, and what about all these vacant buildings and all that, and the fight and, the population shrinking and why, what about all that? And what about the manufacturing jobs that have disappeared? And all the people whose lives used to be very secure, at least solid, because of those jobs. Those are the bigger issues. So, I wouldn't, sort of Monday morning quarterback about the details of what happened last night, but I think, even as President Obama said, it's about these bigger issues, of the, let's say, the community of the city of Baltimore.
Right.
And to what extent they have not made strides. For example, there have been a lot of criticism, and this even comes with the Baltimore Sun, the local newspaper, about, real estate deals and how much, what kind of incentives are certain developers getting, and, how much giveaway is there, in a sense, in terms of taxes not collected and the taxes, waived, whatever. And so there's questions about that, and to what extent the leadership of the city, the mayor and the city council have let that kind of development happen, but ignoring the rest of the city.
Yeah. I wonder, and I guess I saw this in growing up in Boston, and I'm guessing that the same thing is true in Baltimore. And this is not the problem; this is symbolic of the problem. But I think, for example, the one of the things that interested me, because I'm a baseball fan, was the cancellation of the baseball game last night at Camden Yards, and the cancellation this evening of yet another game.
That's right.
And I'm wondering, now there's Camden Yards and right in the middle of the Inner Harbor, the restoration area there. But to what extent are the people that we're seeing on the streets of Baltimore in the last 24 hours, to what extent do they have any connection at all with the reconstruction area at the Inner Harbor, or is that something that only benefits people who live in the suburbs outside the city, who have the wherewithal to go to ball games and pay the prices, the admission prices for the Orioles and the Ravens, and I know in Boston it was the same kind of thing with the Red Sox. You know, when I was a kid, we used to be able to go to a ball game and sit out in the bleachers for $1, and you know, and have a hot dog and all of that. But now you can't. I mean, you can't get near that ballpark for less than $50, and then if you drive there, you have to pay outrageous prices to park your car and various other things. And so, in a sense, it's the Boston Red Sox or the Baltimore Orioles. But the people who are Baltimore and the people who are Boston never get a chance to go.
Yes. Well, again, it is, well, as I'm sure it is in Boston also, I hate to keep saying this. I know it sounds like I'm copping out, but a lot of complexities. I mean, for example, here in Baltimore, the current owner, actually, of the Baltimore Orioles is Peter Angelos, who actually made his money as a lawyer representing unions and also workers who were acquired asbestosis working at the naval yards.
Right.
And so he basically was a plaintiff's lawyer who got very involved in some of these large asbestos suits and also representing other unions. And in fact, he has been very generous. He actually endowed a new law school, or new law school building, the University of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And also, frankly, I saw his son, who is the chief operating officer of the Orioles now, John, I believe his name is, John Angelos. He made actually a very, very compassionate statement. Basically, and I wish I could read it to you right now, it was cited on a website called Democratic Underground. I don't know where else it came from, but he basically said the right thing, which was it had to do with the lack of jobs, et cetera, in Baltimore. I mean, so actually, you have, I would not, the closing of Camden Yards last night had to do, I think, more with the fact that they were very worried about, there were some, I gather there was some, it wasn't full-scale violence, but there was some unrest going on near the stadium, and actually they wanted, at first the Orioles were going to have the game, and they closed off all the gates except one, but then they postponed it, and I can only, imagine that there's some just general concern in terms of public safety involved, but it is true that Camden Yards is a new facility.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to see on my computer if I can find John Angelos' statement, but you see, in fact, he said something very compassionate, which I think has to do, of course, with his father and that family and the way that, the family, in a sense, got to where they are with the Orioles. But, yes, Camden Yards could be considered part of the new development, but I'd say that's probably a friendlier part of the new development than perhaps the Inner Harbor. Camden Yards is not right in the Inner Harbor. It's in a different area.
Right,
and,
right.
So, it's funny. And the Ravens, frankly, again, sure, the ticket prices may be high, but the Ravens do, since I've been here, I've seen lots of sort of very strong kind of community feeling about the Ravens.
And I see that. I see that in Boston as well. Yeah.
Right. So I'm not. So of all of the players, I suppose, oddly enough, and I'm not a sports fan, frankly, hardly at all. But I would almost not want to in any way impugn them because I think.
I'm not either. I think I think probably what it's become something that more and more people find it difficult to access. Because it's kind of like higher education. I mean, higher education is something that everybody used to aspire to at one point in time. Now it's become something that only the few can seriously think about, and that's not the name of the game at all. But
you're right,
anyway.
and I would certainly say that about certainly Camden Yards. Everything is expensive. I was there once.
Yeah.
and I was just amazed not only how much the tickets cost, but even the food vendors, how much they were charging for everything.
Oh, yeah, but it's fabulous. I mean, I went there for a ball game, and I just loved it. I mean, I love it. But I guess what, I guess what I'm wondering is the extent to which, as we've tried to revamp our inner cities or portions of our inner cities, we've done so at the expense of the people who live in the city rather than for the benefit of the people that live in the city, which is, and I don't know that that's intentional going in, but ultimately that seems to be oftentimes what happens. Honest to God, I can't believe we've been talking for more than an hour, and I can't even believe I could go on for another 4 hours, Harry. I mean, this is just wonderful.
I must apologize. I feel like I've taken up all of your time.
Oh, you didn't. Listen, the reason I'm here is to provide a forum for people like you. So, well, by all means, it's wonderful to hear from you. And for the, I'm sure a lot of the people who tune in regularly are saying, "Oh, thank God we didn't have to listen to him all day today again."
Well, are you having a program tomorrow as well?
Yes, we will. We'll have a 2-hour program tomorrow, and we're scheduled for the first 3 days of each week. So tomorrow will be our third one, and we'll be on for a full 2 hours tomorrow. I'm really anxious to see what happens in Baltimore tonight. I'm a little bit anxious about it because I'm hoping that the political pressure on the mayor and the governor doesn't cause them to overreact tonight, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think everybody
that could be very bad. And because there is a lot of pressure. The media is putting a lot of pressure on these people, saying they didn't act quickly enough and they didn't act responsibly in all of this. And I'm thinking if it gets to these people and they say, "I'll show them tonight," they'll be, the response tomorrow morning about my behavior or my action will be a little bit different. And that's what I'm afraid of, because I think a lot of people could get hurt in that kind of a situation. I wouldn't want to see that. So
I share your concern. I think you're absolutely right, and I, and if something does happen, maybe I'll at least call in for a few minutes.
Please feel free to anytime, Harry.
Just check in tomorrow, just to let you know.
I want to thank Bob for connecting you to the virtual center. I think this is one of the days that we can call one of the highlights of this program over the 2 years. Is the time you've been with us.
You're kind.
I believe me, I mean every word of it. I mean it, Harry. Thank you so very, very much.
If I may, I just want to give all the credit, frankly, to Bob Kincaid, who I just am very fond of and idolize, and just think he's great. So please give him all the credit for even having me around, because it's because of him that I'm tuned into your program today.
Harry, I appreciate that. Thank you so very, very much.
You're very welcome.
And you remain safe. You be careful. There's a lot going on around you.
Well, where I live is relatively safe. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you so very much. Okay. Well, I'll tell you, that's one of the. I didn't anticipate that for today, and that's a highlight. That's one of my highlights, and I got to share conversation with a new friend, and that always makes for a good day. And so, Bob, I want to thank you. I want to thank folks for tuning into the virtual center. We're near the very end. We've got a little bit more than a minute left in our program, and I know that it takes a little bit of time for the 3 o'clock program to crank up and get ready to roll in right at 3. Too often I take us right up to the final moment. We'll come back tomorrow to our issue of religious freedom, because I think we've got to respond to issues of the day, and I think the opportunity to have access to Harry's conversation and Harry's insight and is just a wonderful opportunity that we would be woefully remiss to not take advantage of. So again, Bob Kincaid, thank you so very, very much for that connection, for bringing Harry to us. I think more than anything else, this gives us reason to recognize why the Head On Radio Network is so important and so valuable in this day and age. So again, I encourage all of us, if we find ourselves able to spare a little bit, a few extra dollars or whatever, you can't, it seems to me, put them in a better place than to support the kind of network that brings us this kind of program and these kinds of folks and this kind of conversation. This is Bill O'Brien. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I think we could classify our entire program today in the category of civic responsibility. I want to thank you. I want to encourage all of you to be back. We'll be on at our regular time tomorrow. Thank you so much. Be safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.